may be the worst foreign policy blunder in American history. The condoning of torture as official U.S. practice, 9/11, not getting bin Laden, Iraq, Afghanistan still going on, the holding of prisoners indefinitely without charging them, the disappearance of a great American city. And as our Lame Duck Watch special report on President Bush's farewell press conference continues, there's also the onset of what may be only the grisliest recession anyone can remember. And that's if things go well. Mr. President, any thoughts?
In terms of the economy, look, I inherited a recession. I'm ending on a recession. In the meantime, there were 52 months of uninterrupted job growth.
There have, in fact, been two recessions during George Bush's time in office. The first was a mild economic downturn, which started in March '01. And you know, back in 2001, March came after January, which is when Bush took office. So it makes it kind of hard to call that one something he inherited. The second downturn began last December. If it lasts until the second half of this year, which it is likely to do, the current recession will have surpassed in length all other economic downturns since World War II. In the meantime, those 52 months of uninterrupted job growth that the president boasted about, factually true and grossly misleading. There was sustained job growth from September 2003 through January 2007. That is 52 months. But lots of economists, including some former Bush advisors, say that the nation's economic expansion at that time was driven by interrelated bubbles in the housing market, consumer spending, and the financial markets. According to IHS Global Insight, from '02 to '06, the housing boom generated about 600,000 to 800,000 jobs that otherwise wouldn't have been created. Jobs built to last until the phony baloney bubble burst. Since the bursting, job numbers have declined in every month since January 2007. 2.6 million jobs disappeared last year alone. 2.6 million jobs. That's the most job losses since World War II. And unemployment hit a 16-year high of 7.2% in December. Overall, during Bush's 8 years in office, a net total of 3 million jobs were created. In comparison, about 21 million jobs were created under President Clinton. Yet President Bush and his advisors are still trying to rewrite his record on the economy. Bush's chairman of economic advisors recently said that, quote, "It does look like a great 8 years, aside from the last quarter, unfortunately." Or, if you will, we had this amazing house of cards that totally amazed everyone, and it stayed standing for longer than most houses of cards, and then a stiff breeze flattened it entirely. Good for us! Joining us now is Dean Baker, co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Dean, thank you very much for coming back on the show. Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
How would you rate President Bush's handling of the economy, not just through this current crisis, but over the past 8 years?
Well, it's pretty hard to rate it as anything other than very dismal. I mean, him saying that he inherited a recession, it's kind of like a student that flunks the final and says, well, I was sick the first week of class. You know, there were some problems when he took office, but he's been sitting there for 8 years watching this housing bubble build up, watching this house of cards, as you put it, build up, and looking the other way, in fact, celebrating it. The fact that it collapsed and led this to calamity, this was predictable. The exact timing, of course, was not predictable, but that this would collapse and lead to a very bad situation. If he had been awake, his team of economic advisors had been awake, they would have seen this coming. They wouldn't be sitting there looking very surprised.
Right now, as we consider a large economic stimulus program and as Democrats debate whether or not tax cuts should be part of that, it's probably an appropriate time to look back on Bush's tax cuts. He came into office with a large multi-billion-dollar budget surplus. That evaporated with his tax cuts in 2001 and 2003. Looking back on those, were those bad for the economy?
Well, his tax cuts, I mean, we did have a recession. It was probably good to have something to stimulate the economy, but tax cuts are not the way to do it, and particularly tax cuts oriented towards the wealthy, which is what he had done. So we needed stimulus given the downturn that we were facing in 2001, 2002. That helped boost the economy, but this was the least effective way to do it. We should have done it as President Obama is talking about now, with infrastructure, with clean jobs, with spending of different sorts. And if you do tax cuts, you direct them towards low and moderate income people would spend them, not to the very wealthiest people in the country, as President Bush did. So that was not the way to go.
President Bush, on behalf of the president-elect, has now formally asked Congress to release the rest of the TARP funds. And part of that money, they say, will be used to help homeowners facing mortgage foreclosures. Do you think this is a good idea?
Well, you have to look at how that goes. I mean, one concern I have is often what's portrayed as relief to homeowners is in fact relief to banks. So if we're giving banks a lot of money to keep people in their homes in which they have no equity or they're falling in price, that's probably not a real good deal. So you have to look at that very, very carefully. Not to say we do want to help homeowners. Absolutely. We should be trying to help out homeowners, but we want to do it in a way that the beneficiaries are the homeowners, not the banks. And I'm not sure at this point how this will be structured.
Dean Baker of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Even when you don't have the answers, you help us figure out the right questions, which is very important. Thanks for joining us tonight, Dean.
Thanks a lot for having me on.